All right, welcome back. We are COMP125. That's client-side web development in the summer 2020 semester at Centennial, and it's week 7, part 2 of our broadcast. And today, I'm going to give you the details for your mid-semester test. It's a take-home test that we're going to talk about today. And I'm also going to talk more about OOP, Object-Oriented Programming with JavaScript, and hopefully that'll give you a kind of a really good handle on the things that you need to do going forward. Okay, so let's do this thing. So where last we left off, I was telling you that test 1 will be released today, and it is. I'm going to talk about what's going to be on the test, and then we're going to get right into more object-oriented programming. We talked at a very high level, basic concepts last day, and I want to bring in some standard classes that we can tap into. We talked about custom designing your own JavaScript objects, but we didn't talk about object notation too much, and I want to get more into that today because I think it's probably the best part of JavaScript is what we're talking about from here on in. Okay, so let's talk about this together. All right, so first, notice up online on eCentennial, you should be able to see this. There is a midterm test, individual. I'm going to go over that detail right now. So again, in the video, when you look at it, we're sitting at a couple minutes in, and hopefully that'll be good in terms of the things we're going to be talking about. All right, so here's your midterm test. It's worth 50 marks or 20%. Okay, so working alone, you're going to complete the single page application, SPA. Use the web application template provided. Okay, where the heck is that? So if you go to your eCentennial, and if you look at the project, the midterm test, so let's open that up. You're going to see that if I just click on it, you're going to see that the project itself comes with two attachments. One of them, right, is the PDF, which is the thing I'm reading. The other thing is a zip archive, which is the thing you need. Okay, everything you need to get going is in the zip archive right here. Okay, so those are the two pieces of the midterm test that I've given you. So you don't have to download anything from GitHub. And my expectation is that you'll be using the template I've given you. Please do not create your own template or recreate the template I've given you. You must use my template. I will know if you haven't. And we'll talk about that in a second. So you cannot use anything else. You got to use my template, going forward. Okay. So let's keep going. The single page application includes two main sections: the landing page and the contact page. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, let's pull up what that looks like. So here's I'm going to bring up VS Code here, and let me make sure I have that loaded. So I'm going to load up the midterm test. All right, and if you notice, there is one file, index.html. There's the index.html page, right? And it's a single page application in that it's like one long page. That's what it is, okay? And it has different things inside of it. One part of it is a bunch of images of Greece. All right, so I've kind of given you, coronavirus has stopped us from going anywhere. But if I was to run light server on this thing, you're going to see this, right? Notice that there's no style, right? It says the travel report, and there's some credits I gave to one of the designers, right? But anyways, what it is it talks about some really great islands to visit, 9 gorgeous islands in Greece, right? It's a little website, and you can see that there's different islands, different images, and all that kind of stuff. Nice and blue, and truly, you know what? I know none of us have been able to travel really recently because of the travel restrictions and so on. But this gives you maybe some place that we want to go to one day. Notice that this website's made in 2018. My ask of you is that you update it to 2020. I haven't put that in the details, but please do that. It's the copyright statement at the bottom. Okay. One thing I forgot. All All right, so cool. So it's one big page. That's what it is. That's the first thing to know. So it's going to simplify some of your development. My hope is, okay. And notice that I'm looking at assets images for all of the objects, right? You may have to adjust some of these links when you put this up online, but this is the page. You have a package.json file which has all your dependencies and your dev dependencies. And we haven't really talked about what dev dependencies are, but we will talk about that today, okay? And pretty much this is what it is. Now, there's no node modules folder here, and what you need to do first is what it says in the description. It says, make sure, important note, before you begin working on your project, ensure you issue a yarn install to download the required files into the node modules folder, which doesn't really exist right now. Otherwise, your site will not function properly, and you will lose marks as a result. Okay, so please heed this warning. Okay, I know that you're going to try and zip through this thing and whatever, and you're like, wait, I have no style. Well, you don't have any style because, you know, you haven't done a yarn install. So please make sure you do that when you start, okay? One thing also to note is this is due Friday, July 10th at midnight, okay? So it's not due now. You don't have to start now. You could if you want, but it's not due now. It's due Friday at midnight. Just another note, there will be no extensions on this test. All right, so this is something you must get done by Friday at midnight. You get it done at 12:01 a.m., you will get 0. Okay, this is like a midterm test. Okay, so imagine if you didn't show up to class or whatever, you're not going to get extra time. So please don't ask for extra time. That's not going to be provided to you. It also talks about this paragraphs.txt file, a text file. Where is this thing? Well, it's inside of your folder structure. So here's your paragraphs.txt. Paragraph, intro paragraph, Felagros, Elanosis, Spetsis, all these different things. These are all the paragraphs that are in your paragraph text. Here's what I do not want you to do. Do not copy and paste these things into your index.html. That is not the exercise. If you do that and don't follow the instructions, see where it says inject your Ravdos paragraph here? You need to inject it with JavaScript, okay? Not jQuery, not some other language, JavaScript. Please do not paste it in here. You paste it in here, you're going to get a big fat 0, all right, for all those things. All right, so that would be a very bad outcome for you, okay? So that is part of the exercise here. You are injecting JavaScript, all right? Paragraphs, a bunch of them, one at a time, and they have to appear here, okay? In the right spots. Pretty simple. Okay, that's the important note. So there's two parts. There's the landing page paragraphs, right, which is using your paragraphs.txt file that is contained within the project to inject the paragraph content using string variables or other JavaScript constructs, something else, okay, into the appropriate paragraph tags. Pretty simple, all right? Contact page section. When the user enters data in the contact page and presses the send button, the form data is stored in variables that are appropriately named. Okay, that's what I want you to do. Ensure that the values from the variables are output to the console. To the console, guys. Also, make sure your output to the console is pretty. Okay, so I don't want you guys to make a very ugly output to the console. Take a few minutes to make this, to prettify it. Add some lines, add some spaces, do whatever you have to do. Everyone's should be different because you're all different people. So that is really most of your functionality. 20 points is functionality, and there's a couple points here, 4 points for UI, but mostly it's functionality. Okay, site structure. You need to have a content folder, a scripts folder, an assets folder. If you don't have these, I'm giving you these for free somehow or another. If you try and not use my structure, you will lose marks. You must use Bootstrap CSS framework and the font awesome icon library. This is required. You must use internal documentation for your file name, the author's name, website name, and file description for your CSS and JavaScript files only, right? And ensure you include a section header for all your HTML structure, CSS style sections, and JavaScript sections if you need to do so. For HTML structure is pretty much done for you, but CSS and JavaScript is not done, okay? Contextual variable names, inline comments, all that regular stuff. Okay, GitHub. To demonstrate version control best practices and push your site to a cloud host. So you must host your stuff somewhere, and I highly recommend it's going to be on GitHub Pages, but you can choose whatever cloud host you want. Please do not choose your own server at home. That will not suffice for this example. All right, and finally, you must make a short video presentation on YouTube. All right, just like we've done for assignment number 2, where you have a single slide with your face and name and all that kind of stuff on it, and the assignment description. You might demonstrate your site's functionality, how it works, that it works, and describe your code in your app.js. It should be pretty short, because this is a very simple assignment, right? Sound for your video, just last time, must be clearly heard, or I can't really mark you on this. And your short video should run no more than 5 minutes. I mean, that would be like crazy long if you made it longer than 5 minutes, right? And there are some optional site features that will give you some bonus if you have some time. Incorporate smooth scrolling. I haven't talked about this, but this is for you to research. You have a couple of days. Include an image carousel banner, included at the top of the site. An image carousel would mean that, show me each of those really nice pictures from Greece and a nice image carousel. When I click on it, I would take me to that part of the page. That's a really quick and easy thing to do with JavaScript if you know how to do an image carousel. Please do not use jQuery for this one. Any jQuery that's used for this entire site, you will get 0, right? Include form validation that incorporates simple regular expressions for each data field. So things like, is the form itself, like when I'm looking at the form, am I inputting the right data inside each of the fields? And what I mean by that is, example, an email address should have an @, and it should also have at the other end, it should have at least a couple of letters at the other end, like .ca, right? It should have something, right? So my email address, a couple of characters, @ the @, and then I don't know, example.ca or ca.ca. It should probably be like at least 5 characters at the end of that. If it doesn't have those things, it should not be validated. And you can look for something called regular expressions, which we haven't really covered, online and how that works. You can do it for phone numbers and everything else. I think this is a really good one to do and an easy one to do. This one for 4 marks, it's a little bit harder to do. This smooth scrolling one, so if I click between main content and contact sections, if I click the links at the top and they, instead of taking you to the contact sections, it smoothly scrolls there, that is also something that can be done fairly straightforwardly. All right, so bonus marks, if you do these will add on to what your total might be. So the maximum you can get for doing this entire exam is additional 12 marks. That's 62 out of 50. So you could get better than 100% here in this test, and I will allow that. All right. So to submit your work, a zip archive, not a raw archive. I will not accept raw archives. See, it says .zip. If you give me a .rar, R-A-R, I will not accept it from you. Just letting you know. Some people gave me a .rar file for their assignment 2, even though I told them no, right? A link to your GitHub repository. Okay, this must be a working link. Okay, if it doesn't work, or if it's incomplete, or if it points to a repository that's empty, you'll get 0 for this part. And then a link to your live, it says mini portfolio. This is not mini portfolio. A live site, your live exam site. That's what it should be. Midterm, I should put that in there. Midterm exam site, hosted at, if I can actually type, with a cloud provider. And I recommend, I'll say, GitHub Pages recommended, because it's easy. I think we've gone through how to do this and all that kind of stuff, so please do that with GitHub Pages, okay? A link to your demo video on YouTube, preferred, or another online video provider, right? I recommend YouTube. I think it's pretty straightforward, and you can use OBS to put it up there, right? Here's an important note for this one. Important note. There's 2 of them, right? There's one here and there's one above. I'll go through them again. Your project will not be marked unless you submit a demo video. Some people did not submit a demo video for assignment 2, and they thought, hey, I can just lose a few marks. Yeah, no. On this one, you must submit a demo video for academic integrity. So I know it's you, right? If you don't submit it, you get 0 out of 20% of your final grade if you don't do it. So it's super important this time to get it done. That's why I tried to prepare you with a demo video for your last assignment, okay? Again, this is out of 50. You can see the distribution of marks. Functionalities were 20. So if you don't get functionality done, and if you don't do your user interface, you pretty much won't pass. All right, this one. And especially if you don't do that, you won't be able to demonstrate anything, and you won't be able to put much on GitHub. I mean, really, you need to do your functionality. That's the main thing. Worth 20% of your total mark for this course. External code, the only reason why you'd want external code is for those extra bonus marks, and it should not surpass 10% of your final code, of your total code base, all right? Otherwise, you'd be considered cheating, and I'm not going to accept jQuery as a solution. You need to use vanilla JavaScript, or else just you can do it. You can add jQuery. I just won't accept it. Just letting you know, okay? So, for the stuff that you're doing, all right? Because we're not talking about jQuery yet. We've been talking about JavaScript, so that's what I want you to use. Okay, so again, if you look at your project, and you can look at it on your own, there is already a project to start with. I'm not asking you to recreate this from scratch. You will use this template. Okay, some people, for whatever reason, in other times, have created their own from scratch and made their own little thing, whatever, and then I gave them 0, right? So. Please don't do that. You'll get 0 for your exam, and that would be a very bad outcome, right? So I don't want that. I want you guys to use this one. It's pretty straightforward, and it helps you get going. Also notice that your app.js is pretty much empty. Look, there's nothing here. There's an iffy, and there's use strict, and your code goes here, which means you have to do all this code on your own. The code that I'm asking for is very straightforward. So, I mean, really, this is probably one of the easiest tests, in my opinion, that you can possibly do to get your marks for 20%, okay? Okay, that's end of explanation. Questions around your test? I'm looking at the our chat log here for any kind of questions. Okay, so I get no questions so far. So again, please make sure there's 2 important notes. Here's one of them. Important note, you must do a yarn install so you can get your node modules folder populated with the proper libraries. And the second important note is this one, which is probably the most important note. You don't hand in a demo video, you get 0 for your exam. I need a demo video from you this semester, all right? So I know it's you. And it has to be your voice, can't be somebody else's voice, and all that kind of good stuff. Has to be your image, not some other person's image. Has to be from your computer, not somebody else's computer. All that kind of stuff is going to happen. Okay, can you explain the contact page again, send button functionality? Okay, I will. And I didn't understand about the JS apps. Okay. Wow, it's really coming down here. Major storm happening on this side. All right, so you're asking about the contact page again. All right, so let's take a look at that contact page. I'll bring up VS Code. All right, so the contact page. So there is no contact page, right? Look, it's one massive app, one single page application, so to speak. And there's 2 links, right, on your navigation. One link is main content, and the second link is contact. There's two links that you're going to see on your navigation. I've already embedded Font Awesome, and I've given you free marks for using this thing. I'm giving you free marks for using my template. Because I've embedded Font Awesome, I'm going to make it all work for you. All right. All you need to do is download or do a yarn install, and your site should work. Right. So when I click on Tour, right, it's going to take you to this section that is main content. This is automatic. There's nothing for you to do. See this part, main content. It's going to teleport you here. When you click on this link, the tour link, then there's another link for contact. When you click on the contact, it's going to take you down to the contact page. Right. And the contact page is the contact section. It's the same page, but it's just going to zip you up there. It's going to scroll you to that page, that part of the page, right? Your contact. Now, for the contact, you have everything here in the contact page. I've given you kind of the structure that you need. And what you're going to be doing, right, for the contact portion, which is what I've described up here, is when the user enters data, right, in the contact page and presses the send button, the form data, which is all the form fields, will be stored in variables, okay, that are appropriately named. That's for you to figure that out. Ensure that the values from the variables are output to the console and make it pretty. That's what I'm asking for. It's pretty straightforward. Let me go to the next question here. I don't understand about JavaScript apps. Okay, I'm not sure what you mean, MD. Next, we must maintain the structure perfect, but the name variables in the structure, can we rename them? Are you talking about, Tiago, are you talking about the name variables inside of your HTML? Or the name variables, because there's nothing named, there's no variables at all right now. The only thing we have in the HTML structure, if you look at it right, you can see that we just have these names: first name, last name, contact number, email, your message. These are the variables. So, I mean, no, the answer is you have to use those. Honestly, I'm still confused about how do I have to demonstrate for a form from a demo video. I did show the codes and the website for the last assignment. Is it right? Yes. So what you do is, for your demo video, you say, here, look, here's my site. It's working. I've injected all the paragraphs through JavaScript. And by the way, let me take you to my app.js, and let me show you how this works. So you see here, I've got these variables, and go through it. That's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to go through and explain what you've done in your own words. That's what I'm asking you to do. It's pretty straightforward. Okay? All right, sorry, the named classes. So you're talking about, Tiago, inside of the here, the named classes like form group and panel body. Like, what do you mean? Are you talking about named classes like in your app.js? There's nothing really here. So, I mean, you can name it whatever you want on your on the JavaScript side. Do you mean on the HTML side or the JavaScript side? There's no. So no, you don't have to make a new page. It's a single page application. One page. There's two parts: the contact part, and there's the landing page portion. So there's only one page. Tiago, are you good? On the HTML. Okay, so on the HTML, you want to rename stuff? No, I would say don't rename everything. Leave it as is. You have to hook into it this way. So good question. Are you allowed to change your HTML? The only thing you might want to change on your HTML when you're putting it up online is your links, to make sure that all the links work. Because remember, when you put it up online, you have to have a /, and on the assets, there is no /. It's the same as assets, but in order for you to make your assets, your images work up online, you need to adjust the paths. I'll leave that for you guys. That's part of your getting it up online mark, right? So, but otherwise, the classes, they shouldn't be modified in any way. Okay. I can't put any ID tag on HTML page. Nope. You should have everything you need, right, in here. Look, paragraph has an ID, right? This paragraph has an ID. Every paragraph already is marked for you. Okay? So there's nothing to do. So in other words, all the questions that I'm getting are, can I modify my HTML page? And my answer to you is, you should not have to modify your IDs at all. The only thing you may need to modify is your path for your images to put it up online. That's it. The rest is ready for you to go. Remember, this is not an HTML course or a CSS course. It's a JavaScript course. So most of the work you should be doing is JavaScript. And the other question I have to also answer, even though you guys haven't asked this question, I'm going to answer it anyway, is do I have to load the paragraphs from the file? Because I've got that question in the past. And the answer is no, you don't. No, you don't have to load the paragraphs from the file. Okay, that's not the exercise. The paragraphs from the file is what you need to put into your JavaScript in order for it to inject inside the page. Now, if you want to inject the paragraphs in the file, go ahead. And if you let me know that you've done it, right, and that you've done it correctly, like you've loaded from the file and you're using it, maybe I'll give you a bonus for doing that. But you don't have to. You can literally copy paste this stuff inside of on the JavaScript portion inside of strings, and you're good to go. I may have missed it, but do you also want us to do multiple commits for progress tracking like we did for the portfolio? Absolutely. It's actually here. If you look inside of your page down here, and under GitHub, which is in this place, it says your repository must include your code, well structured. That's just if you put it up as a backup. And then B, your repository must include commits to demonstrate the project being updated at different stages of development. That's B. So if you don't do that, you'll lose 2 marks. Any other questions? Again, I wanted to give you, no problem. I wanted to give you all the details you need to be successful with this test. I think it's a very straightforward test. You should be able to knock this thing down in a couple hours max, right? I would say, and that's how it would normally be. If I was going to test you right now, and you were going to do it, I mean, this is something that I ran in class, right? So the only difference here is that you have to put it up online. I didn't have that part, and that you would have to make a video, which you wouldn't have to do if you were in class with me, right? So, but here you do have to make a video. It's going to take you a short amount of time, and you do have to make sure that it works online because I want to know that you can do that. Some of you did not do that for your little mini portfolio site for whatever reason. Can I change the text and image that's provided? The answer is no. You cannot change the text or image at all. No text, no image. You cannot change it, MD. Not at all. If that's what you meant, the answer is no. Okay? Because that's the test. Your test, your images, your text, everything that I've given you, the entire template, you cannot change. Right? The only thing you're going to add is your in your app.js file, you're going to add some code. That is the exercise. So in your app.js and here, this is where I want your code to go. Right? Really, there's no need for app.css to change. I've given you a little bit of a custom style sheet that I modified. And like I said to Tiago earlier, if you need to change your path for assets, that's the only thing that you'd have to do. All right, so assets in here. But otherwise, for the most part, you just keep what you have. Yes, Nushik, keep what you have and make it work with app.js. Absolutely, that's the answer. For a website to run, can we use sendcall.ca? No, you cannot. I will not accept that. It has to be up on GitHub pages or something online. Okay? As I mentioned last time in your portfolio site, I won't accept that either for your portfolio site. All right? So some of you did that anyway, even though I told you not to. Okay. What are different upload the zip file and cloud server in GitHub? If you upload the zip, okay, if you upload the file, and I'm not sure what you mean by that, so CM, I'm not sure what you mean. Do you mean what is? Are you thinking about uploading the zip file on GitHub? If you did that, your GitHub pages may not work properly, and you'd also lose 2 marks because you wouldn't show progress in your version control. Can I talk to portfolio site once again? No, the portfolio site is done. Are you talking about the midterm or the portfolio site? For the midterm site you're talking about. There's nothing for me to talk about the portfolio sites for things like smooth scrolling. No, that's for you to figure out. Is there a certain browser you're going to test for our sites on, just to be certain of compatibility for things like smooth scrolling? I'm going to be testing with Chrome. Thank you for that, Chris. I'm going to be testing Chrome all the time. So, definitely test with Chrome yourself. I highly recommend. Although nowadays, from what I'm hearing, Chrome 86 is something that's being incorporated into Edge. Microsoft has taken their engine, the Chrome engine, the V86 engine, and putting it in, which is very interesting that Microsoft is going that way. But yeah, please use Chrome for full compatibility. Is it have to be named the files in GitHub a specific way? Well, naming your files in GitHub, you wouldn't name your files. Are you talking about your GitHub repo? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Because you're not going to name anything. I mean, the files that are here in your on your folder is going to go as is up to GitHub. Oh, so you're talking about your repo? Yeah, I mean, you could definitely call it that. That's not so important for me. Like, for example, if you look at your requirements here, it says that your GitHub files demonstrate version control, your code, and will be well structured, right? So, I mean, I don't say anything like you must name your GitHub repository a certain way. I don't think it's required, but it has to be your repository. So it can't be forked from somebody else, or it can't be a copy of somebody else's stuff. It's got to be yours. I'm not sure what's cloud provider in submitting your work, number 3. Okay, cloud provider, this part, right? Cloud provider could be GitHub pages. Like I said, GitHub is a cloud provider, right? You could also use, like I mentioned before, something like Microsoft Azure, Google Platform, Amazon Web Services, or some other platform. But I think those are overkill, to be honest with you. This is free, GitHub Pages. And this is why I recommend GitHub Pages. Please use that if you're not sure. Okay, anyone else have any questions? These are really great questions, guys. I'm glad that you're actually asking questions. MD, do you have any other questions? Is that a hand that I'm seeing, or are you good? Okay. All right, if there are no more questions, then thank you for all those questions. I'm glad, because there's some sections that never ask me any questions about their exam, and then they go do it, and they're like, they're going to ask me all these questions on Thursday. So, again, guys, here's what I will not accept. Please do not come to Friday evening by 11:30 p.m. and say, Tom, I need more time. Or Friday afternoon and say something like, Tom, can you look at my code? I'm not sure why, but it doesn't work. Don't send me code through email or anything like that. If you need help, genuine help, like you're unsure about instructions about what to do, like you're asking these questions that you're asking right now, I will help you. But things like, please take a look at my code, give me some feedback on my website, see what do you think about how this works, guys. This is a midterm test, right? So the feedback that you're going to get from me until after you submit it is going to be minimal, right? Only because you should know what you're doing, right? Okay. God, you guys are crazy here. Let's see what we got here. For now, good. If I have a question further, last one. Okay. MD, what to do? Yes, I will show you. I will definitely show you, Tiago. I'm so sorry. I know it's difficult sometimes to pull and push from GitHub, but I'll go through it again. It's captured on the videos. I know some people are having challenges with this, but we'll go through it like as if I'm making a whole new site again. Okay, I'll definitely do it for you guys. I know people are struggling with that, and it's not just you. All right, so we've talked to death this midterm test, and we need to move on so I can show you how to do everything. So let's just kill this. And I'm going to also, turn this off. So I'm going to go File, and I'm going to, I want to close my folder, which is going to make my stuff go back to normal. And notice that I have this COMP125 M2020 lesson 7, and all that was some practice last day. This is what we did last day, where I talked about classes and objects in JavaScript, right? And I talked last time about how you can separate stuff and everything else, and how you have two files now, an app.js file and a person.js file, okay? So these are the two files that I've got here. And my app.js file, if you notice, right, is, you've got like this object Tom, which is of type new objects.person. And this is definitely kind of a way you can create a class. You can put it inside of a closure. This namespace is what this is, or a module like we talked about. And then inside the class, you got some getters and setters and everything else. I also showed you some quick ways of figuring this stuff out. So if I go to typescriptlang.org as an example, and if I go to Playground, even now it's going to have my person class, because this is what I did, as well as my, kind of the stuff that I've got here. Notice also it says that it has no initializer, and by default all these things come back up. So whenever you go back up on typescriptlang.org, just turn some of these things off. And what it should do is it should allow you to, so one thing is that you don't want is strict null checks. That's definitely what you want in there. You definitely don't want null. Always strict is actually the best thing to put in. Always strict, because that adds in use strict up here, and the rest should stay the same. Everything else should be fine when you're testing up online. This is just your little sandbox, if you will. to test how your objects look on the right hand side. So we know how to do a person class, and we know how to export it from a namespace like objects. Let me just take it out of the namespace one more time just to make sure that we can look at the class by itself. So I'm just going to go here and put class. I will remove the namespace. The namespace is right here. So now it's out of the namespace for a second. Namespace is like a container. It's a container that kind of encapsulates or wraps the class. And the reason why we do that is because it's easier for us to use. Notice I can't use objects.person because there is no more objects namespace. I can get rid of this and just say person. But what if I want to make Tom, I want to use inheritance. Now this is something that is part of object-oriented programming. Object-oriented programming for JavaScript is a little different, and you're going to notice some really funky stuff that goes on here for object-oriented programming. Okay, let me show you. So if I say something like, I want to make a new class, and my class is going to be student, right? And my student, we can say if I want to, in some other languages, for example in C#, I can use the colon. Colon means extends, right, in C#. Same thing in C++. In other languages, you need to use the extends keyword, like this, extends. Actually, it works the same as it does in JavaScript. If I say extends person, right, then what I'm doing is I'm making a brand new class, right? You can see that on the new JavaScript way of doing things, it totally works the exact same way. Look, it's a mirror. This is exactly how it works in the new JavaScript. Let me take you back to the old JavaScript just for a second. So old JavaScript, ES5, all right? Yeah, this is how it used to be, right? And if you notice here in ES5, we had to make a shim for to make the way to do object-oriented programming inheritance work like C# does. Okay, you can use object-oriented programming and inheritance a little bit different because remember that in JavaScript we use prototypical inheritance, not classical inheritance like we do in C# or in Java. And so there are differences. And this is the difference that you would get this really interesting helper function that they've created here with TypeScript. And this is one way of doing it in order for you to get proper compatibility with older browsers. You'd use this kind of functionality here. Now, I don't expect anyone to remember any of this, but basically what you're doing is you're creating a helper function to create the illusion that you're inheriting from another class. That's what you're getting here. Okay. Now, some of you, and this is week 7, and you're into C#, may have never learned inheritance yet, because some of you are still learning about inheritance, and that's going to start for you guys next week for the most part. Inheritance and polymorphism in week 8 for you. But for my classes, the people who've had me for C#, we've already talked about inheritance. And remember what inheritance is. Again, I'm going to assume that you don't know inheritance, so I'm going to go over it with you guys here really quickly at a high level. So inheritance is like I have this, I have a class blueprint here. Here's my class. And let's suppose this is my base class. We call this our base class. And it doesn't matter whether it's C# or C++ or JavaScript or Python or some other language, okay? Base class. And your base class is kind of a blueprint for other classes, right? And the reason why is because my person class really doesn't have a lot of context, right? So let's suppose this is the person class. Okay, here's my person class. So this is called either a base class. Its other words for it are superclass or parent class, right? As an example, right? Superclass, parent class, right? Those are other words for base class. Okay, so superclass or parent class. And what we want to do is we want to take some of the information that we have here and create 2 other classes. For example, more specialized classes. And that's one feature of inheritance. We have our other classes that we say derive from the base class or extend the base class. And when we think about other classes, I want you always to think, see how I made this bigger square or bigger rectangle? It's bigger than the base, the parent class or the superclass, because we call these things derived classes, right? Also known as, right, child class, right? It's a child class of the parent class, right? That's, you know, what it is. It's a derived class, right? And there's other words for a child class or a derived class, okay? But they mean the same things. And when you think about them, these child classes, we can think of there's a connection, right, between the derived class and the base class. In fact, there is this connection, a dependency, if you will, right, between one class and another class. This dependency arrow, right? This derived class depends on the base class, this person class. And I can think about ways of extending classes. And here is the student class. The student class is a person, right? Student is a person, but is a more specialized version of a person. And that's what derived classes have. They have specialization. Okay, that's what I want you to think about this. So whenever we talk about derived classes, there's a specialization compared to the generic base class. Okay, specialization. And the derived classes are always bigger in programming, anywhere, any programming that you ever do, from now, as long as they use object-oriented programming, right? All the child classes or derived classes are fatter than the parents. Okay, now that's not true in real life. In real life, sometimes, you're going to say parents, they're a lot fatter than the children, right? Because, children are younger and all this kind of beautiful thing, right? Not so inside of, in programming. In programming, parents are always slimmer than the children. Children are fatter. Why? Because they include everything that the parents has plus more. Always. Always. Otherwise, you don't need an extra class. All right? So that's the thing. And I can have more than one child class. In fact, I can create something called an inheritance chain. So I can make another one. And I want to talk about these in a second. Let's make sure there's another one down here. Oops. Let's use another bigger one. All right. I'll make a really bigger one. I don't know. I can't fit it on my page bigger. Okay. How about this? Really big. And this is another class. And we can make a further specialized class. So this can be another derived class, right, with further specialization. And if you think about a class like this that derives from another child class, right, here's a derived class, with more specialization, let's think about this. A student, and then there could be different kinds of students, like international student. That could be a student specialization. Right? So that's a further specialization. Okay? Because we have this specialization stuff happen. So think about this for a second. We have these specializations, and we have a dependency. International student depends on student. Student depends on person. And when it comes down to any class or any structure that we use in any programming language, you have this dependency chain. And these are all the links in the chain. All right? So where the person class affects, any change I make to the person class would affect the student class or the international student in this case. Okay? We could have another type of class, which is very similar to this one, right? We could say that we have another one over here, okay, at this level. Again, I'm just drawing. And this class here, okay, make a really ugly arrow. This class here is another derived class, okay, with different specialization than the international student. This derived class here, right, that also derives from student. It's got a relationship with the student, but this one might be a domestic student, and there might be a difference between a student that's international and a domestic student. Maybe an address might be the difference. Or the fact that domestic students can get local student loans and the international student cannot, as an example. Or some other things that are that differentiate the two, right? However, I also have to say that we have a situation where we can still create derived classes from the superclass, the base class, right? We can have another class over here, let's say roughly the same size as the student class, and this is also a derived class or child class, right? With different specialization than the student class, and this could be the teacher class. Okay, this is a classic example, by the way. So I'm not making something up here. So the teacher class, as an example, if we were talking about teachers and students, they're both people. I like to believe that students and teachers are both people, all right? They're just different types. They have different roles. A student is a learner and a teacher teaches. Now, in real life, that's not always the case. A teacher can also be a student, okay? But in here, let's keep it simple. Let's say if you're a teacher, you can't be a student. Let's just say, okay? But the business logic follows that a student has a special relationship with the person. And the relationship that it has is called an is-a relationship. Okay, an is-a relationship. So we could say that the student is a person, right? And so too, the teacher is a person. Okay, and that makes sense. If you can pass that test and you can say, is a teacher a person? Then you have a good case for making a specialized class, right? Just starting off like that, first thing. How about down here? Is an international student a person? And the answer is, yes, it is. So even though international student is a student, right? It's a specialized form of a student. The international student is also a person. Right? So they meet both criteria, the further specialization, although they're fatter, right? Not to say that international students are fatter than regular students or whatever. I'm talking about here from a programming perspective. So please take what I'm saying with the context. I'm not trying to insult anybody. Same thing with domestic student. Domestic student is a student, and it's also a person. Here's the question: is a domestic student a teacher? Is a domestic student a teacher? Is there a relationship? What's the relationship between a student? I know some people said an X. I got some X's. That's good, because it is not true. The international student and domestic student are not a teacher. They have no relationship with teacher, other than that they're both derived from the person class, and that's where the relationship ends. They're both people, but they're differently specialized than a teacher is, very differently, because they are specialized from this branch, the student branch. This is the teacher branch, and the derived classes of domestic student and international student have nothing to do with this branch. They have a different specialization, okay? So that's something you have to know. So this presents an interesting scenario, and one of the questions I always get asked is, can an object derive from two classes? In other words, multiple inheritance. And in most languages, most modern languages, other than C++, okay, C++ will allow it, you cannot do this. You can't have a second class like this, okay, that you're going to derive from. So you can't do this, okay? This idea where you derive from two different classes, yeah, that is a no-no. That doesn't work, okay? So I'm just going to annotate this with my thing. So this, no good, okay? This doesn't work. There is no second class. You can only derive from one class at a time. Okay, that's something to know. However, there are ways you can get other functionality, right, as an example, from other structures. And you're going to learn about this in object-oriented programming with polymorphism. For example, you could use something called an interface, and the interface in other classes would allow you to inherit a method, as an example, of a particular structure. right? But not the whole class itself. And the reason why we have a problem with this idea of multiple inheritance is this problem with something called the deadly diamond. Okay, so deadly diamond, where you have a structure like where you have a class here and you have a child class down here as an example. And this class, right, these other two classes inherit from this class. And you could have a situation where this class in multiple inheritance inherits from this class, these two classes. So what am I doing? So if I have a method that's here and I have the same method that's here that's been inherited from here, but this one's been overridden, which method do I take? This one or this one? I don't know is the answer. And that's why this is no good for most languages. This will mess you up, right? This deadly diamond possibility. Or even further, if it wasn't like this, right? So you didn't have the deadly diamond. You just literally had, your class inherits from two different classes like this, and they're the same exact. You have the same exact method. Let's say you have a method A, right? And lambda here, method lambda, and a method lambda over here. I made it a lambda. I don't know why, but if you have these two method lambdas, it's called lambda, or A or delta or whatever you want to call it, alpha. Which one does it take? Does it take this one or does it take this one? Well, the compiler would not know which one to take, so therefore it would be ambiguous and it would cause a problem again. So this is some of the reasons why multiple inheritance for most people don't work, because the average programmer can mess up, right? So Java and C# do not allow multiple inheritance. However, C++ does, because it can solve problems. Okay, it can solve certain problems. And the idea is if you're programming in C++, then you should have the control in order for you to use multiple inheritance wisely. Okay, that's the idea behind it. So that is the idea of very high level of object-oriented programming. The assumption is by now you should have been taught some object-oriented programming and the idea of inheritance in object-oriented programming, right? And I'm pretty sure if you follow the structure in your C# COMP125 course, if you guys are doing the regular stream, then you would not have been taught this until next week. Next week you're going to start doing object-oriented programming with inheritance from C#. Am I right? Check marks if I'm right, X's if I'm wrong. If you have me, that means you've already done it. And that's why I did it for people who have me, so that they can do this and then they understand what I'm talking about. Okay, thank you for that, for the input. So that's how it works. We have a blueprint or a prototype in, as an example, in JavaScript, and then we have another prototype that inherits from this one. Okay, that's how it works. So that's what's happening here. We have a person class as an example, and it's pretty generic. But maybe I want the student class to extend, that's what we call it. We use extends, the extends keyword, to extend the person class and make it more specialized. In order for us to do that, we have to do a couple things. One, I need a constructor. Okay? I'm just writing here up on line again. The constructor must satisfy the superconstructor requirements. Now I'm going to go back to modern JavaScript, not this old stuff. So I'm going to go to ES 2015 and beyond. All right? So we must have a constructor that satisfies the requirements of the superconstructor, which means we need to call the superconstructor's constructor. And it has to take in a name and an age in this case, because a student is still a person. It needs to still satisfy the previous constructor, this one, up the chain, this one right here, right? It still needs a name and an age, right? Now, that means we probably want to take it into the constructor here. So we want to say name and age, but maybe the student has something special about it, like a student ID, which is a string, let's say. So we're going to pass in the name and the age to the superconstructor. So that's required, name and age. If you don't do this, you will not satisfy the requirements of the superconstructor, and you'll say, when you do this, it'll be not. I noticed there was no error that came up here on JavaScript. That's bad, right? And this is where I love TypeScript, because it's like, hey, guy, if I didn't have this in here, it would be like, wah, an error. Because this is truly an error. But here in JavaScript, it won't complain until you try and run it. And then it'll go, no, it doesn't work. Because, of course, it's not going to work. You haven't satisfied the requirements. The requirements of the superclass, or the base class. You must satisfy the constructor of the base class. That is a rule when it comes to inheritance. Okay, name and age as an example. So, and this satisfaction must happen immediately. Okay, you can't wait to send forward information to the superclass. You must do it before anything else. All right. However, you could do something like this if I had again, some kind of properties. So this could be our constructor. And then I could have properties just like before. So I could have a getter and setter. And I could have, let's say, a student ID that was private. So private, and again, M underscore student ID, right, which would be of type string, right? I could have this. And then I can make some, so these are private instance variables. Private instance variables. If I can spell variables. Okay. Again, I'm just demoing here, so you can. I'm going to take this back into Visual Studio in a second. Visual Studio Code, and then here you'd have a property. So the property that you would have, right, as an example, would be a getter and setter, just like we've done before. So here, just like we have getters and setters for name and age, I'm going to have getters and setters for my student ID. So again, it's get, right, student ID, right, and then this would return something, a string. This is the TypeScript version. We need to return this dot m underscore student ID. That's what it returns, yeah? And the same thing goes with set. If you want to set student ID, we pass in some kind of value, which is a string. And then we can say that this dot m underscore student ID is equal to value. By the way, in C#, you don't always need to use the this keyword, but here in JavaScript you do. Okay, you have to be explicit. All right, so we have our getter and setter, and we have our student ID. And here, what I can do is in my constructor function, I can say something like this dot student ID is equal to student ID. Okay, this is the parameter. This is my property. So I'm loading the property with the value of the parameter. That's what I'm doing. I'm passing the value here. Okay. And you can see here what I've done. It just reorders things. It reordered my constructor first and my getter and setter afterwards. It did the same thing for my constructor and my getter and setter after here, because this is the most compatible way of doing things from a brand new JavaScript perspective. I can write it the way I want in TypeScript, but JavaScript prefers it this way, okay, for compatibility. One more thing I need. I don't just need a constructor. Maybe I need a method, something that specializes my class. Otherwise, why am I having this thing? So I might have public methods and private methods, but let's say my public method will be something like studies, right? Just like, you know, the person can say hello, well, the student can study. So I'll say public is studying, or let's just say studies, because this studying is like a question. Is it studying? Studies, right? It returns void. But what it does is does a console log, and we can use a backtick character for our template string to say something like this dot name. Notice I'm using the property name, right? This dot name is studying. However, if I ever try to use the private member variable, these two private member variables, mName and mAge, I don't have access to them inside of my derived class, right? So if I said something like, hey, I want to console log in my constructor m underscore age, it's going to go, meh, you can't. And the reason for this is it says cannot find the name m underscore age. You mean this m underscore. Even if I did that, if I said this dot m underscore age, it's going to say that the property m age is private and only accessible within the class person. So I can't access private member variables of the person class from my derived student class. I can't do that, right? I need to use the properties, the public properties that I defined here in these getters and setters. Or, that's one option. Or, if I change these accessors to protected, that's another word that you're going to learn in C#, right? Protected. Same thing in JavaScript, right? So if I change these to protected, which is not recommended, by the way, then I do have access to this, right? To this private property, right? Or protected property. However, we want to almost never do this. We want to use our public properties. This is to solve problems, okay? And it's not recommended. We use this sparingly, not very often. So let me undo those. Oops. Okay? We don't do that because we don't want to access it directly anyway. We want to use the getter and setter. All right, so that is how students work, or the subclasses, or if you will. That's another way to calling it. We could call this, I forgot to put that as a thing. We said that the child class is here, right? Child class, derived class, or subclass. Let me put that in there too. Subclass is another subclass. The subclass is like another word we use for a child class. So you could call it derived class, subclass, child class. It all means the same thing. Now here, this student class in this diagram is both a child and a parent. It's a child of the person class, and it is a parent to the international student and domestic student class. So it serves both purposes. This is a special type of class. Okay. So then if I go here to person, Tom, maybe Tom is a student now. It's not a person. If I say Tom is a student, well, now I need to further specialize. This is where the specialization comes in. Tom is a student. All right, that's his name. It's expecting 3 arguments, but I'm only giving it 2 because I'm missing a student ID. Let's give Tom a student ID 2, which is like A123456789 Okay, that's his student ID somehow. And then I can say Tom says hello, but Tom also studies. I can do both things. I have access to both methods. I can access the says hello and the studies method. Okay? Notice that that's true. By the way, I'm not sure why says hello is lowercase. Maybe it's because says hello is spelled differently. There we go. With a capital. Hey. All right, doesn't matter. And typically what TypeScript will want you to do is make any methods capitals, any properties capitals, and anything lowercase would be like private instance variables or those kind of things. Okay? Make sense? Let's run this thing and see if it works. So again, I'm going to go to here and go to run. Right? I'm running the code. I'm going to go and look at, I'm going to inspect, and I can look at the console, and you can see that Tom says hello and Tom is studying. Both of those things work because Tom is a student. Tom has access now to both the name property as well as the brand new student ID, which if I was just a person, he would not have access to. So we can say that clearly the person class inherits or has everything, the student class has everything that the person has, plus it also has this stuff and it has this stuff, which means, my friends, that it is fatter, it is bigger from a shape perspective than the parent class or the parent class, okay, or the base class. And again, you call it everything. You can call it 3 things. If I was going to test you on it, you would be able to say parent class, superclass, base class all mean the same thing, right? Child class, derived class, subclass all mean the same thing. Okay. And some classes can be both a parent and a child, depending on where they are in the inheritance hierarchy. Okay. Questions around inheritance. I'm teaching it to you now, but you're going to learn it again with C# next week. All right. This is good. This is good. So this is how you would code inheritance, and this is what it would look like in new JavaScript. It almost looks identical. Look. So things I've done here with my class, it looks like almost the same here. The only difference between TypeScript and the new JavaScript right now are these things right here, these private instance members. Notice it doesn't even exist here. Why? A variable will not exist in JavaScript until you use it in a class. If I assign something to it like this, then suddenly it exists. If I don't assign something to it, it does not exist. You cannot use let or const or var inside of a class in JavaScript. You cannot use those things, right? The this keyword talks about the context of the class. And whenever I assign something, then I create it. That's how it works. By the way, it works the exact same way in Python, right? And other languages like that. Okay, now let's put our person class and let's also put our student class in the same namespace. So just like before, we're going to go back up here and we're going to recreate this namespace. In TypeScript, you can use the keyword namespace, or you can use the keyword module. They mean the same thing. Module is the older word. Namespace is the newer word. Let's use namespace. Okay. Namespace objects. Let's call it objects again. You can call this whatever you want. I'm just going to call it objects. And inside the namespace objects, by the way, I want to take all of these two classes, the student and the person class, and I want to grab these two classes and put them inside here. Okay? Now this will fail again. Tom cannot just be a student. He's got to be an objects.student because student exists in the objects superclass. So the objects namespace. And if I did that properly, and I may have not put it in the right order. Oh yeah, the reason why. Okay, here's something. They exist, but the reason why I can't access this is because I haven't used the export keyword. I need to use the export keyword here and here in TypeScript. But notice something that's weird, right? There is no export keyword, right, in classic or the brand new JavaScript. It doesn't exist for namespaces because, like I said, the thing that I'm missing that I wish we had is that we wouldn't do this funky iffy anymore. That we would have namespaces or modules in JavaScript, and we don't have it like this. If we did, it'd make my life a lot easier. Okay? But we can still use this iffy structure that we used before. And then if we did that, notice that I'm attaching the person class. And notice down here I'm attaching the student class to the objects object. This presents another structure that we can use inside our VS Code. All right, so notice that here we have our objects, and we said person is in the objects namespace. This is back in VS Code. Let's make a new script called student. So if I do a student.js, and now I want to put it in the same objects namespace, I'm going to have some challenges. One, I have to code it similarly. I can't do this anymore because I've already defined objects in my cache, my browser cache. I can't do it again. If I define something like this outside here, this is a global object. This is the difference between globals and local variables, right? This global object up here, right? I can't use it the same name inside student. It just won't work, right? Because I've already defined it here. It's going to say you've redefined something. However, I still can do this. So let's grab this part. Because it exists, I can still do this, objects, right? And I want to grab the bottom part of it, this part here, right? I'm recreating my closure. So again, this is my closure, right? This is my namespace. So namespace objects. Okay? This is my namespace. Bear with me, guys. Don't lose me here. Okay? Even though I've defined it here, objects, this is the object that I'm attaching to. This objects here is the namespace that I'm attaching my new thing to, which is, if you go back up to Typescript, I can just grab this part right here, export student, up to down here, right? Actually, I'll do it on this side. I'll grab, because there is no export keyword. I'm going to grab all of this and this part, objects.student is equal to student. Copy this, go back to VS Code, and paste it. Come on, if I can actually type Control V. There we go. This is good, right? Now, take a look. Extends person. What person does it extend? And I have to put things in proper order. Curious, should I put student before person, or should I put student after person? What should I do? Absolutely, Steve. You're absolutely right. You cannot put it before because student depends on person. So we need to do /scripts/student here, right? Order matters in our script selection, right? Our script ordering. Person must come first because student depends on person to exist. And when we do this, suddenly, you know what? Student understands what it is. It knows what a person is, right? However, here we have a problem because person itself is outside of the class, right? It's probably best to call this objects.person to be short. Okay, objects.person. We don't normally need to do this, and we'll try it both ways, but you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we've just done the same thing. We said that this closure, this is part of the same namespace, right? But we're in a different file, student.js, and it depends on person.js. In my app.js, if I change from Tom being a objects.person to an objects.student, Tom30 does not satisfy the requirements. I need to put in some kind of student ID. Okay? And then I can try and do tom.studies. And just to be clear, and just have the same structure, let's make says hello in the person class. Let's make it caps. So here's app. And now let's try and run it. Okay. Again, we don't care about the visuals. All we care about is we don't have an error. Now it says Tom says hello is not a function at start. Okay, cool. So let's see if I mess up. I did. See that? It detected it. Says hello. And now we have Tom says hello and Tom is studying, and we're good. And we're getting these things from different places, right? Hey, let's go back and change that thing. Let's go back to student and change this from objects.person just to person and see if it makes a difference. By the way, it shouldn't, but it does. Because unfortunately what happens is here person doesn't know what in this object here, in this student's file, it doesn't know what person is, right? Person doesn't exist, remember? For anything outside of this file, it's inside of the namespace. We need to be explicit, and that's why I need to use objects.person. Otherwise, if I don't use objects.person, person does not exist, right, by itself. Okay? So this is two things we've covered today. We've covered, again, I'm going over classes and object-oriented programming with JavaScript as well as inheritance. Guys, we're not going to stop talking about objects and inheritance. I just wanted to cover the biggest parts for you because this will cover most of what you need to make your own specialized classes in JavaScript. You'll become JavaScript superstar ninjas after this if you follow what I'm telling you to do. Because most people, they don't know how to do this stuff very well. Right? But then again, they're not JavaScript developers. Most people who are JavaScript developers know this stuff, right? And more. Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoint a little bit to make sure we've covered everything. So again, we talked about object-oriented programming and an object, also called a component. Popular object-oriented programming language, C++, Java, Visual Basic, and C#. This is how we create objects. We've kind of talked about this in other programs, other programming languages. And we talked about a few things, few properties of objects. Things like the idea that we want information hiding, or we want to keep a black box. That's why we have private instance variables and public properties. We want to kind of information hide, right? The great thing about encapsulation, it reduces complexity and prevents bugs. That's what we want to use it for. And here's an example of an encapsulated object, get element by ID. That's a class, right? We don't know what's happening on the back end, how get element by ID is working. We just know that it works. We don't know the inner workings of get element by ID, right? Which is good. So again, classes are a grouping of code, methods, attributes, blah, blah. An instance is an object that's been, kind of an object of an existing class. We can say that we instantiate something when we create an object. These are all things that you've learned in C#. And there's some built-in classes, which is what I want to hit. For example, the arguments class, which is a very interesting function. The array class, the Boolean class, the date class, and so on. These are all different classes we can tap into. And one of the most popular classes to tap into is the math class. We've already actually tapped into the object class when we did that whole object.create, right? Object.define property. So here's an example of a function, and I want to instantiate, right? I want to instantiate an object. I've got calc circle area, right? And I'm using math. Here's a math object, the math class, and I'm using the pi static variable, and math.pow math class, and the pow function power, right? And here I can get area from using the math class, right? We're also using the get element by ID class by satisfying its constructor requirements. Okay, so kind of simple. That's what we're doing there. Again, if I want to instantiate an array, I do it this way, but I can also instantiate an object by doing it this way. And this is called object notation. Object notation. So this actually creates an object. You can't do this very much in other languages. Okay, this, curly braces, is an object. So, whoa, what does this mean, curly braces is an object? Well, if I go back to app.js here, and I do something, first of all, let me put this up on GitHub. I'm going to go here to GitHub, and I'll talk about GitHub again from scratch in a bit, as I've been asked to. But give me a break here, and I'll do it. So let's get in here. So I'll say something like git add dot git commit -m, and I'll say added the student class. Git push origin master. It pushes up into the into GitHub. Yay, it's done. Done-ski done. Yeah? Wonderful. So you guys should have that code now if you look up online for the last thing I shared with you. Okay? But let's take a look at that app.js. What if inside my function I defined a new object? I'm going to call this let new object be equal to curly braces. Oh man, what the heck is this curly brace notation thing? If I hover over, you can see immediately new object is declared, but its value is never read. What is new object? We don't know yet. It's an empty object. Think about it as there is no class for this object. It's just an anonymous empty object, not defined. All right. If I want to print this object out, console.log, and I want to print out new object, okay. And if I was to do this thing and I ran it, okay, let's take a look. I get object, right? And inside the object, we see this thing called Proto. I don't know if you guys can see that. There we go. I've zoomed in. Proto. Proto means prototype. So the prototype means the superclass or the call it, again, the base class. The base class is the object superclass. Object is the base class of all classes in JavaScript and Java and in C#, actually. Object. And if I click this little down arrow and I extend it, you can see that it has a constructor. It has something called hasOwnProperty. That's a method. Is prototype of. Property is enumerable. ToLocaleString. ToString. That's a method that all other classes have. These are all the methods that that all other classes have because they derive from the object superclass. Okay, and it also has getters and setters, right? That's the thing. Okay, so all of them have getters and setters, all of them. Okay, so even if I don't do anything, once I do curly braces like this, I've actually created a class in JavaScript, an empty class. And what if, let's rename this thing so it really makes sense. We'll call this, I don't know, the teacher class. Okay, so we'll say teacher is this teacher object, actually. Okay, and I want to attach stuff to the teacher object. This is how you do it, right? So I want to say teacher dot, and then something I want to add in, name is equal to Tom. Teacher dot ID is equal to a, we'll say B1234. Okay. Teacher dot age is equal to a number like 35. Not real, but anyway. Okay. Cool. Teacher, a bunch of IDs, yeah, and then I've assigned stuff. Hey, let's even give a method. Teacher dot teaches is equal to a new function that is console log, and we can say that backtick, right? So I want to say that this dot name, right? Can I say this? This dot name is teaching. Let's see what we get with all this stuff. If I'm crazy, okay? What? You're gonna say why? Why would JavaScript allow such a crazy construct if it was even allowed, right? Well, yeah, man. Take a look at this. It says name is Tom, ID is B1234, age is 35, teaches. Well, that's an object, and teaches is actually a function. But the problem is that you can see that name Tom is in here, but man, what the heck? What happened? How come it says undefined as teaching? How can I get my name is teaching, right? And how do I get to that, right? So I want to say this dot name. What if I say, teacher dot name? Is that something that I can do? Teacher dot name is teaching. That's pretty explicit, right? Yeah, Tom is teaching. That works, right? And you're going to be like, whoa, man. Whoa, right? Like, this is another way of doing objects. Another way altogether. And, by the way, this object here and this object here, let's print those out. Let's print this one out here, too. Let's go console log. And let's print out Tom. All right, Tom, when I print out Tom, I'm printing out the class. I'm not, or the object, the instance of this student class. Okay. Here, when I print out teacher, I'm printing out the instance of the teacher object, whatever that is. All right. Okay, let's take a look. So student, this is interesting, but here there's no prototype. Look at the difference. The prototype here is person. The prototype here is object. I've got an object, right? Here I've got a person. That's the difference, my friends, right? Between the two. But it has properties. Look, mAge, mName, mStudentID, ID, age, name, if I want to give it other things. It has some other things here too, right? Notice one thing it doesn't list here as an example, it doesn't list studies. It doesn't list says hello. But if I go into here, then you can see that I have studies, right? And I also have, if I go further down, because take a look, person is the prototype, right? Person is the prototype of Tom. That's the prototype. Even though Tom is a student, it derives from person because it extends person. Okay? So studies is down here. But where is says hello? Where do I have the says hello method? Because the says hello method is here somewhere too, right? So here's studies. There's studies, right? It says scopes 2. Constructor, here's the constructor for student. And I can keep going down the pipe inside of my person prototype, right? Until I find the says hello method. Okay? I'm just putting it out there because, you know, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what this looks like until you actually try doing this kind of stuff. Okay? Student. Does that make sense to you? It's in the object. Yeah, it could be. It could be, but the point is, like, you only have access to certain things. So there's studies. Here's the constructor for the class student. Here's the getter and setter for student. How about in the object? Is it here? Here says hello. Okay? Does that make sense to you? So that is, you know, the way inheritance works and classes work and objects work in JavaScript. JavaScript doesn't really care, right? Be careful though, because teaches is not at all like studies. Studies is a function. See this function here? Studies is a function. Teaches is another object. Teaches is an object. Okay? It derives from the function constructor, right? But it's not the same structure as studies. All right? Putting it out there to you guys. It is different. Okay? But they can serve the exact same thing. In a pinch, if I want to use object notation, so object notation being this way to do things, compared to this way of doing things, hey guys, look, it's pretty simple if I need an object. If a construct requires an object, any object, this meets requirements. So does this. Right? Whether it's this or this, both meet requirements. Okay? And of course, I can't extend so easily. By the way, if you're interested in JavaScript inheritance, if I type in JavaScript inheritance, right? I'm just going to put it in there for you. Developer.mozilla.org shows you more details about how this can work. Prototypical inheritance, not classical inheritance. And it starts talking about the function, the old way of doing things here, right? Where my person, remember this, the person constructor, like we talked about before, with age and gender and interests. I don't use gender nowadays because of reasons. But person.prototype.greeting, which is a way of adding a person, that's no problem. Defining a teacher constructor, this is all classical stuff. And you can see that I can use person.call, right? I can call the super constructor, which is the person constructor for this one. And then as we keep going down, it talks about how to inherit from a constructor with no parameters and blah, blah, blah. There's lots of detailed stuff in here. For example, my teacher.prototype, I can say is I want an object.create the person.prototype. My friends, this is how we do extends in old school JavaScript. Teacher.prototype is equal to object.create. Object.create person.prototype. I make a new person and I now teacher is that. Teacher is then a person prototype, which is kind of what we do in the back end, right? Again, I like the extends keyword a lot more. It's just cleaner and easier, and we don't have to worry about it. But how would you do it here, right? Well, we know that teacher, right? Again, if I was to go back out to the web for a second, I go to this one, and if I go to inspect, right? And if I look at console, and it's an object, right? So this object here, right? I can make it so that this object inherits from person, right? I could do it. Let's do it manually. Let's see if we can do that. Let's use object.create, that other syntax that we were presented with here. So we're object.create. So we can say that teacher.prototype. Let's try that. This type of stuff here. Okay, so before we do any of this, we say let teacher is equal to this. Let me just hide all this stuff, right? So again, I'm just going to toggle my block comment. All right, so there's my block comment. And let's do something like that. Let's say that, teacher.prototype. Can I do this? Prototype. It's not going to stop me, by the way, if I did this. Prototype. Teacher.prototype, right, is equal to object.create. And then we're going to use objects.person.prototype. Objects.person, because remember, person is inside the object's namespace, .prototype. Okay, let's see what happens when I do just this line, okay? Which is kind of like me extending. Remember I made some kind of object with object notation, right? JavaScript object notation. It's not JSON, okay? It's just object notation. What do I get when I do that? Do I get an error? No, right? Look at that. Prototype is person now. Before it wasn't, just object. And if I look at prototype person, I got age and name. Yeah? Let's try that out now. So if I did that, if I said something like, okay, well, this is cool, and if I did this and I want to satisfy the constructor, right? I mean, I could say that, the teacher itself is a construct, right? Teacher is a construct. So I could say like let, Mark be equal to a new teacher, could I not? Where teacher needs a name and an age. So I can say Mark and age 20. And let's do Mark dot says hello. Let's do that. Let's see if that even works. And what happens, right? Does it work? Can I do that at all? Well, teacher is not a constructor, that's for sure. Because teacher is an object. So we can't really do it this way. Okay? This doesn't work. However, can we do teacher.name? Teacher.name, right, is equal to Mark. And can we go teacher.age is equal to 20 or 25, let's say. Is that okay? And yeah, take a look. Teacher, we know age and name is there. How about says hello? Teacher.says hello, right? Is that even a thing? Can we do that? No. 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 And the reason for this is because even though this doesn't give us an error in JavaScript, we really didn't inherit. All we did was we pointed to another prototype. We said that the teacher.prototype is pointing to this. But we didn't do the other part, which is the call part. And if you notice in here, what we want to do is we want to call that function. And using the call keyword, if I want to use the call keyword, I have to use this. All right? So I got to do something like, just like it says here, I make a new function. This is another way of doing it. Teacher. That's old school without using object notation. And then I want to say, so I want to say like, just like it says here, where we say person.call, I could do person.call, right? And it would be, by the way, it'd have to be objects.person.call. And then I pass in what it needs, which a person needs an age and a name, right? That's what it needs. So I pass in age, or name and age. So Mark, and then 25. That I could do, right? And let me just take these away for a second. So objects.person.call, and then I also have to give it a context, this. So I could pass in the context, which is teacher. Okay? Now let's see if this works. So it satisfied the requirements of the previous constructor, and now I want to see if it works. By the way, I'm not confident that it's going to work. Yeah, I didn't think it was. So we can try. I mean, it's interesting, but we didn't use a new keyword here. We just called the old teacher, right? So this doesn't work, the structure. But it's funny what we can do with it if we just use object.create. Lots of stuff we can do. A little bit advanced. But the idea here is that this is totally cool. This is totally fine. We can do our own object that has nothing to do with our person prototype. As an example, we can just do this. Okay, and this totally works. Because we can do it. We can make something very similar. Tom is teaching, right? One thing to note is the order of output, right? This is interesting. Look at this. So Tom says hello, Tom studies, right? Let's just change the name here so we don't confuse things. We'll say Mark. So take a look here. Tom says hello, Tom is studying. Here's the student, which is what we printed here. Here's where we print student. But now when we do it, right, I said that first I do console log teacher, right? Console log teacher. And I say teacher.teaches. Teacher.teaches. Mark is teaching. Teacher.teaches, right? And if I don't call this, let's say if I don't call this at all, I still get Mark is teaching because I'm making it a new function. By the way, if I said is equal to function like this, this is different, and now I'm not going to get a call, right? New function makes a new object. That's what a new anonymous object was what I was getting before, because I'm using the new keyword. If I do this, now you can see that Mark has a teaches function, just like student has a studies function. Okay, if I did it this way, teaches. And I won't call this function until I actually do the call. So I can do something like teacher.teaches. I get a call that function like this. If I call the function, then and only then will it show off that part. If that makes sense. Mark is teaching. The only difference is it's the order. So, notice it says Tom says hello, Tom studies, and then console log Tom. Tom says hello, Tom is studying, console log Tom, right? Teacher is teaching, and then console log teacher. Teacher is teaching, console log teacher. Okay. So I know this is confusing to some, this kind of situation. It's the difference between making an object with class-like inheritance, classical inheritance, kind of, and the way of doing it in using object notation. You'll see object notation throughout JavaScript. If you look it up online, you'll see a lot of this. A lot of the old school class type, notation. So that's why I'm showing it to you, because it's identification, right? So this is totally cool, except for the var. It should be a let, right? And this is totally cool. The date. This is a built-in function. Let's try that out. So if I say something like let date is equal to a new date, and I want to console log date, then you're going to see that my date says Wednesday, July 8th, 2020 at 16:08, right? As an example, this is the time I took it, Eastern Daylight Time. It gives us a lot of information, right? I can also go back to this and specify something I want to find. Date has a lot of little functions built into it. Date dot, you can see get time, get full year, a lot of methods. These are all the methods that it has built into it. Get date, get day, get hours, get milliseconds. And it also has some, the purple are all methods, right? As an example. And there's also other things. Like, for example, if I said get dot, date dot now, right? That is a popular thing to ask for. Date dot now. I want the now, the date dot now. And I hate when it does that. Sorry. Date dot now says undefined, but you're going to see that a lot. Date dot now. Date dot now. But the date itself, and if I said I want the day, get the date, as an example, That would totally work, right? That would totally work. 8, the date, the 8th, of the month. That's what that date. And if I say if I want to formulate my own get month, right? This is also going to come back as a number 6, right? Why 6? Why is it 6 and not 7? Come on, guys. Why is it 6 and not 7? You might think that the date, the month should be 7, but actually it's 6. Why? Because zero-based counting. That's why. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 7th month, right? And that's a weird thing. It doesn't give you that information, right off. That's a thing to do. So that's the date function. Built-in, some really built-in functions. The other ones is the math function. I love that one. Console log, math.py, right? We're going to use the math.py function, right, as an example, and it's going to give us the value of pi to some precision, 3.14159.265, right, and so on. By the way, as programmers and mathematicians, you should know at least this much of pi, up to here. You should remember that forever and ever, 3.14159.265, right? And this way you never have to look it up, because that's good enough precision for most of the things we do, right, is okay. Obviously, if you get more precision, more precise, then I think that it's better if you want to draw circles or do calculations. You might be a little off if you don't do more digits than this, but it'll be good enough for most of the things we want to do. It'll be close enough to what we want. Okay, so that's math.py, and lots of other built-in functions that we can explore. All right, so that's that part. New date. One thing is the garbage collection in C#. Garbage collection is automatic, and so too is it for now anyway, in JavaScript. And JavaScript's getting more advanced memory functionality as we go to the latest version, the new JavaScript toys that we're getting. More JavaScript functionality with more memory management. Memory management in C++, however, is not managed. You have to do it on your own unless you use smart pointers. All right, so 3 common classes: date, number, and math. Those are the most common ones. We saw date and math. What about number? What do you do with number? So if I was to go back here and look at number, what things can we do with number? So if I go number dot, well, look at that. Max value, positive infinity, negative infinity, epsilon. We use this function for something that's very, very small, right? Epsilon is close to a number, but not quite a number. As an example, parse float, number.parse float, parse int, very similar to the functions that we have in C#. Those things we use them a lot. But these standard things, max value, and positive and negative infinity, these are really useful things. Okay, min value, minimum value of the number, maximum value of the number, minimum safe integer, maximum safe integer, like those things are used a lot. Nan, not a number, right? So that's what we use those things for. Okay, so that's some basic functionality, basic built-in classes that we like to use. And here you can configure the class, the date class to use. I'm not going to go through this. This is for you to use. But you can see here, Independence Day, the American book that we took this from, new date is the year, month and day, kind of stuff, July 4th, where 6 is July. Remember, we talked about the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And that's Independence Day. And then, you can specify, you can format your day by breaking it down. I'm not going to go through this. This is literally you looking up how to use this and format your date to make it look nice. Okay, that's what it is. Okay. So that's what that is, and there's some really great examples here about using the weekday and so on. Hey, what about enums? This is like okay, but what about if I want to make an enum enumeration here in JavaScript? How does that look? Well, I'm going to take you back to TypeScript for a second before we get there. So yeah, TypeScript has enums too. So let's go outside of the namespace for a second. And if we go to the TypeScript documentation, so if I go typescriptlang.org again, and if I go to, and this is a great thing, if I go to documentation, and if I go to handbook, and if I go to enums, right, it tells you how to declare an enum. This looks very similar to what we do in C#. Well, why am I showing you this? Because this is TypeScript, not JavaScript, you might say. Yes? But if I took this exact thing, enum, the way it is, and brought it back into our example, copy paste, what does it convert to in JavaScript? Well, my friends, it looks like this, right? It says that I'm making an associative array with my enums, right? And that's really smart. That's a really smart way of doing it, right? So I'm creating first of all, I'm making a global, in this case, called direction, right? I have a function. Look, another iffy that I'm passing stuff into, an object more or less. And inside that object, I have something called direction, where inside of direction, I have an array of arrays. An array of arrays. That's what I'm doing, right? So I'm saying that, let's move this back down to 0 for a second. If I just did this, right? You can see that the array direction, the inner array direction, think about this as an associative array, and I can do that. Let's go. If I want to make an array, there's a couple ways I can make an array. One of them is an array that uses an index, right? So I can say something like let my array, and I can define my array as 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, right? Here's my array. And if I console log my array, sorry, I know I'm running out of time, but I got to show you this. And I go back to here, you can see that here I have an array structure. The prototype is an array. This is the one thing to look at. 0, 1, 2, 3 is the value of each of the indices. 0, 1, 2, 3 are the indices, and 1, 2, 3, 4 are the values. Yeah? 1, 2, 3, 4. But you can also make an array that looks like this. Let my associative array, as an example, I can do this, and I can say something like my associative array, I can say 1, right, is equal to 1. My associative array 2 is equal to 2. My associative array 3 is equal to 3. And let me do one more. My associative array 4 is equal to 4. And if I was to print out my associative array, console log my associative array, if I did that, then you can see that what I'm going to get is something weird. It's going to say, cannot set property 1 of undefined, right? Because 1, there is no 1 in an associative array, right? There's nothing like this right now. And why is that? Why is this the way it is? Well, because of my friend useStrict, right? If I was to take my friend useStrict out, you might see that we might be able to get that thing happening. So 1 doesn't really exist, my associative array, right? Doesn't exist, my associative array. And I want to set a value to it, 1, 2, 3, 4, but it does work more or less, in the JavaScript world. And it could be because the way I'm setting it up. Let me just go back to my playground for a second. Yeah, here. So it's exactly what I've done, right? Direction. I've made it so that it is up, down, and so on, or 0, 1, 2, 3. This is exactly what I've done with me. The difference is that this direction here is actually an object. So if I was to do this, let me just take this here, direction, and instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, I was to put that in there. Let's just get rid of var just for a second. And I can do this. I can do like a closure and a closure, no problem. Let's put let in here. Let direction, function direction, blah, 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 blah. And then if I said something like, let's see what direction looks like, right? And if I go back to here, you can see that direction actually has 0, 1, 2, 3, right? Is up, down, left, right. So that is the first part. First part is that we have an array of values, and then down, left, right, up is 0, 1, 2, 3. Right? You have both those two things. You can access it in both ways, and that's how JavaScript handles enums. So if I said something like direction dot up, right, as an example, because up is a direction, right? direction.up, then you're going to get undefined here, right? Direction.up, right? Although it should be direction.up, because I said up is lowercase up. Let's try that again. Up, 0. Okay. So it kind of works, right? But that's how you do an enum in JavaScript using associative arrays. Okay, let's get back. So that's associative arrays, and let's get into the last part of what I want to talk about with thing. It's actually, we're at the end, but more or less these are the months. They're showing you arrays. There's the number class. It tells you about some stuff. Hey, toFixed is a really awesome thing for the number class. What you can use is when you want to configure a number, you can fix how many decimals a number will output. 2 decimal, 1 decimal place, how many decimal places, and so on. And toPrecision is also something that you want to do. Okay, so that's where the number is used a lot. toLocale string, max value and negative values and all those things. Math is huge. As a math class, we talked about all the different functionalities that it has, cosine, sine, tangent, all the popular things, square root, and so on. Math has that. Euler's number, math.e, which is really, really, kind of important when it comes to things like rotations and so on, and a bunch of other things. Okay, and here is that custom object. There's 2 ways of doing it. This method, where we make a new object, or this method. By the way, we can use this as well, new object, and new object does the same thing. It's the exact same thing. It uses the object prototype. Okay, that's your own custom objects, which is what we're doing. We can make an inventory list, right? An inventory list, which is an object, and I can add the inventory date. Once I do this, if inventory list was an object, and I add inventory date, I actually create inventory date when I add it. That's how it's done. Okay. And here's an example of using object notation in a curly brace in here. So another way to do it. So let's say, for example, I'll do this last part and then we'll go. Okay. I do apologize. I just want to make sure I cover the basics so that you can do what you have to do going forward. Okay. And then we'll talk really briefly about your test again. So this is one way of doing it. I'm just going to go out to here. But what if I wanted to do it a different way? I could, inside of here, just like it shows us in here, I could allocate properties inside of my curly braces. So I could do something like this. I could take all these, put them in here, right? And then separate them by commas. So I can just allocate it like this. I can say name, and what you would do is something like this, name, and instead of equals, you put colon. So name Mark, Mark, ID, right? And instead of a semicolon, you put colon. Teacher age, let's put age there. Age, instead of equals, you put a colon. You're just defining properties. And teaches, you can still do this. Teaches, this is another way of defining the same thing. Instead of doing it my way, you can do it this way as well. And then you can redefine them this way if you want. But you can still do this. And if you notice the difference between this and the other way, if I go back out to the website, there's no difference. It's the exact same thing. It's prototype object, name is Mark, age is 35, and we have the same configuration that we would normally have. So this is, this is exactly the same way as doing it the other way. It really depends which way you prefer. Sometimes this solves a problem because this predefines an object. Other times we want to use the empty curly braces and add objects as we go. That is also a good way of doing it. Okay? Really depends on what you want to do. Because that's what this is. And we talked about this really briefly. And you can make sub-objects of this kind of stuff. And I think I've covered everything you need to know about how to do this. And we're going to get more into, we did methods already. Yes, and this is the other one, that the last part, which what you can do is if you want to go through each of the properties of an object, you can use a for in loop, where you say for every variable or property of the object, loop, whatever you want to do. You can go through a loop like that. So one question, I'm going to stop here. One question is there a situation when it's better to use the student way or use the teacher way? In other words, use my fully, kind of customizable classes over this way. Well, you know what? If I'm making, if I'm creating a large application, I never want to do it this way. This way is just, it'll kill me if I do it this way, right? I mean, for a very large application, this would be nuts, right, to do it this way. Can it be done? Can I make classes in this way? And a lot of APIs, application programming interfaces in JavaScript, are written just like this with some default values. For example, name, ID, and so on. Okay, you can totally do that. But therefore, specific objects. If I want to use specific objects, like I want to define an object, like kind of in real time. And if you learn Node.js with me next semester, a lot of the objects we'll write is like this, right? But if I want to write a bigger application with more specialization, then I want to write it the other way, the classical way of doing things, which is I define a class, I make a blueprint first, and then I instantiate objects of that kind of class. That's another way of doing it, and I recommend that way over this way 9 times out of 10. Okay, that's just me, the way I write stuff. But it really depends on the developer. Some developers really like the flexibility that this gives you. It's very short, it's shorthand and to the point. I can make an object and I can use it right away. I can pass it into a database or even into a file. The other way, I have some more work to do. I have another file, I have more definitions and so on. And as an example, it bothers some developers to go into that much detail to build up a structure for you to use when you can do something simple like this. So that's the answer. It really depends. It really depends if you want to do something like this. Any other questions? So one thing to note before I let you guys go, we kind of did, again, a really high-level overview of object-oriented programming with JavaScript, very high level. We did a very quick 2-day kind of crash course on object-oriented programming on JavaScript. That's what this was. This is good, but I want you to remember that this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. We haven't really talked too much in detail about inheritance, except for what we did today, and how to use these things going forward when it comes to programming things like the DOM, right? So you're going to see more of this type of stuff and less of DOM manipulation in the next JavaScript course you take, because DOM manipulation is something that is something we do less of, and we do more things with, for example, Node.js and front-end framework like Angular. Okay. All right. Assignment 1. Assignment 1. Does form data in instruction for contact form mean data that user will put? You mean the test? Okay. Yes. So that's a good question. By the way, guys, I'm gonna stop recording this now because our day is done. But I will answer questions. So let's stop recording this one.